Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So I'm breaking down the Monday Night Football Showdown slate for tonight on Draftkings with the Rams versus the Buccaneers. And what might be a bit of a tricky game for fantasy purposes because both these defenses are pretty darn good. We have some crowded backfields and the quarterbacks have a plethora of options to get the ball to. So it might be a little bit tricky here, but we're going to break down the numbers and we'll try to derive some conclusions from those numbers to make some fantasy plays. So hopefully this ends up being a pretty solid game. But if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. Might as well hit that notification bell as well so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And YouTube tells me that around 50% of the people watching these videos have not yet subscribed, so if you're a frequent visitor of the channel, or if you're new and you like what you see, consider that subscribe button because it's really going to help the channel grow, and that's obviously going to help me out as well. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, and as always, we'll start with the quarterback position, and up top we have a very expensive Tom Brady at $11,000 in a pretty tough matchup versus the Los Angeles Rams, and like I mentioned earlier, both these defenses are pretty darn good, so it's not going to be smooth sailing for these quarterbacks, but both these guys got some really good weapons to get the ball to, especially Tom Brady. He's got an amazing trio of wide receivers: Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown. Like, that is an insane group of wide receivers. He's got the half-washed version of Rob Gronkowski. Cameron Brate's not that bad either, and he's got Leonard Fournette out of the backfield. So no shortage of options here for Tom Brady. Now, I do know it's a tough matchup versus the Los Angeles Rams. They're allowing the second fewest points per game to quarterbacks, and their 9th DVOA versus the pass, and only 15.8 DraftKings points per game as well, with only one passing touchdown. So it definitely won't be a cakewalk here for Tom Brady. But they do have the higher implied team total at 26.25 this week. They are playing at home, and Brady's averaging close to 300 passing yards per game. So, again, I don't think it's going to be a super easy cakewalk matchup here for Tom Brady, but his weapons are good enough to get him there, and I think he's a fine flex play. Probably not going to get up there in the captain spot just because of that massive price tag, and a lot of the weapons in this game aren't that cheap, so we don't just have a ton of money to throw around to put Tom Brady in the captain spot, but I do think he's a safe, solid flex play. And then going down to Jared Goff, $9,800. He doesn't have quite the weapons Tom Brady does, but he still has some pretty decent options to get the ball to in Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods. Reynolds has looked pretty good the past few weeks. Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett aren't the worst tight ends in the world. I know they're not that great, but they're not the worst. And I do think this price tag makes him a pretty easy fit into our flex spots. I'm not really going to go out of my way to use Jared Goff in the captain spot, but he does fit nicely in the flex spot. And I always like getting exposure to quarterbacks on showdown slates, especially in cash games, just because it gives you a nice floor. Now, the matchup versus Tampa Bay, it is pretty brutal. They got a really good defense, and they're actually first DVOA versus the pass, and allowing less than 2 passing touchdowns per game. But they're just a little bit softer in the fantasy point department, allowing the 7th fewest points per game compared to the 2nd fewest points per game for what Tom Brady's going up against. So Jared Goff, he's a fine flex play. I'm not expecting fireworks from him, but he's been racking up the passing yards in recent weeks. He's just not really scoring touchdowns. And last time they played versus Seattle, he had over 300 passing yards, but the running back stole the touchdowns. In the Week 8 versus Miami, he had 355 passing yards, but only one passing touchdown in that game. So he's been getting a little bit unlucky in the touchdown department, but maybe he gets a little bit of positive regression there and throws a couple of touchdowns. And if he does that, gets 250-plus yards, at only $9,800, I think that'd be just fine in your flex spot. All right, moving on to the running back position. This is where it gets a little bit messy because we have two backfields that are in committees, and we have to try to figure out these timeshares. The Buccaneers is a lot more easier to figure out because it's just Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette, and we know their roles in their offense. But the Los Angeles Rams, that's where it gets a little bit tricky because we have Henderson, Malcolm Brown, and Cam Akers. And it's a bit of a three-headed monster here. Not saying these guys are the best running backs in the world, but it's definitely a full-blown committee, and they're going up against one of the best rush defenses in the entire NFL. So good luck figuring out that backfield. So let's start off with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and it's simple for me. I like Leonard Fournette over Ronald Jones just because he's about half the price tag, and he's the pass-catching running back on that team, which is valuable on a PPR site like Draftkings. And there's a lot of good expensive players on this slate, so we have to find some value somewhere. And Leonard Fournette, $4,400, I feel like he's a bit underpriced. I know Ronald Jones had that huge game last week where he scored nearly 30 DraftKings points, close to 200 rushing yards, and he ripped off a 90-some yard touchdown. And he's not going to do that every week, so that's why I'm kind of leaning towards Leonard Fournette, because I know Ronald Jones had the huge week, so people might point chase that, but we can't expect that to happen each and every single week. And Fournette, he's got the pass-catching role here, and he's just a little bit too cheap in my opinion. He played on 40% of the snaps last week. Meanwhile, Ronald Jones was around 60%, so they are priced accordingly to who's the starting running back, who's going to get the most snaps. But even then, Fournette does not have to score the same amount of points as Ronald Jones. If Fournette scores the same amount of points as Ronald Jones, that is a big W for you if you did roster Leonard Fournette over Ronald Jones. So that is my lean on this slate. Now the matchup versus the Rams, it's not like the hardest matchup in the world. There are 12th DVA versus the run. It's not great though, but they're allowing the 6th fewest points per game to running back. So again, no soft matchups here, but they are allowing close to 6 catches per game to the position, so that could suit Leonard Fournette well. But really on this slate, you're not going to find a good matchup for anybody. So you kind of just got to take what you get, but definitely like Fournette on this slate. I think he's one of the better point per dollar options as well. And as for the Rams backfield, I can read you guys the snap count. So Malcolm Brown led all the running backs in the snaps last week at 41%. Then it was Henderson at 33%. Then Akers was at 26%. So that's just an absolute mess. And to be honest, if I'm playing one lineup, I really have no interest in any of these running backs. It's a really tough matchup. It's going to be a big split here, so it's kind of like good luck figuring that out. Whoever scores the touchdown, I guess that'll be the better play, but the Buccaneers are second DVA versus the run. Now, they are allowing the 9th fewest points per game, which is a little bit more than the Rams are, but still overall only 54 rushing yards per game. Close to a rushing touchdown per game, but rushing touchdowns are fluky, as touchdowns are just fluky in general. But actually close to 7 catches per game, which I do believe leads the entire league. So there's a little bit of upside there for a pass-catching running back, but again, it's a full-blown committee here, and it's not one I'm really looking forward to having to try to figure out on this slate. If you had to absolutely pick one, Cam Akers is the cheapest at $2,800, and the last time they played, he had about 10 rushing attempts. And if you could do that again, at $2,800, that's not that bad. But overall, this is more than likely a situation you're probably going to want to pass on if you're voting like 1 to 3 lineups. If you're voting 150, yeah, you're going to want exposure to some of these guys. They're not like overly expensive. They're all below $6,000, and Akers is pretty cheap. But it's definitely a committee. It's not a fun situation to try to figure out. That's for sure. All right, moving on to the wide receiver position, which is absolutely loaded. I definitely want some exposure to these guys because there is a ton of elite talent here. We have Cooper Kupp, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Robert Woods, and Antonio Brown as our top shelf wide receivers. Like, we got 4 to 5 wide receiver ones right there, so I definitely want exposure to these guys. The thing is, the matchup sucked for all of them, but the ball's got to go somewhere, and points are going to be scored in this game, and there's a good chance it's going to come from at least one of these guys. So we'll start all the way up top with Cooper Kupp at $9,200, and personally, if I'm going to go with the Rams wide receiver, I'll probably end up taking one of the cheaper ones and Robert Woods. Like, I feel like Robert Woods is pretty much the same exact play as Cooper Kupp, and he's $1,000 cheaper. I know he doesn't get quite the volume Cooper Kupp does, but $1,000 difference, I feel like they should pretty much be the same price. Maybe Cooper Kupp being just a little bit more expensive, but $1,000, I feel like that's a bit of too much of a gap. So I'm going to side with Robert Woods over Cooper Kupp there, just based off the price tag. Josh Reynolds is cheaper as well. I know he's not as safe as a guy like Cooper Kupp, but he doesn't have to since he's about $3,000 cheaper, and he's definitely been involved in the offense the past few weeks. And then we have Van Jefferson at $600. I know he's not really much of a factor on this team, but he's always got the threat of getting a target or two. And at $600, that definitely makes him worthy of a dart throw. But Kupp, like I mentioned, the volume's going to be there. And now I know he's been a little bit injured, but I don't think it's going to be anything too serious. But over 8 targets per game, a 25% target share. I mean, the numbers are fine. And Jared Goff's been racking up passing yards. The thing is, he hasn't really been racking up the touchdowns, but touchdowns are obviously quite fluky, and I mean, I like Cooper Kupp's chances of having a decent game here. Now, the matchup versus Tampa Bay, it's not that great. They're first DVA versus the pass, and they're allowing only the 10th fewest points per game, so I don't expect these guys to go absolutely off, and he's the most expensive wide receiver on this slate, which I'm not sure if I totally agree with. So for me, he's just like a tournament play only, and I say that if you're playing, I mean, cash games on showdown slates are a bit crazy, but he's not one of my favorite plays on this slate, that is for sure. Mike Evans, $9,000. He definitely has big play upside, but again, I would rather just take the cheaper pass-catching options instead of the more expensive guys, just because I'm going to have to save some money, and I can't just pay up for all these expensive guys. So if I want exposure to these offenses, I'll just take the cheaper ones and try to make a more balanced lineup. But the wide receiver situation is kind of similar to the Los Angeles Rams running back situation, because you have 3 guys that are definitely going to be involved. You have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, and all these guys are elite talent. So I think they can all eat here, but I feel like we can get similar production from Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown, so I'd be more inclined to play them. I think Evans is the tournament play because I'd imagine he might be lower owned than Godwin and Antonio Brown just because of the price point. And we know his upside's fine. He scored around 20 Draftkings points last week, but all the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers did okay. But Mike Evans, the guy's obviously good. He's got touchdown upside because he's absolutely massive. But the price point, I'd rather go with the cheaper guy personally. Is that meaning I'm going to fade Mike Evans? No, he is going to see his fair share of Jalen Ramsey, unfortunately. So that's another downgrade for him. But overall, he'll be okay. It's just I'd rather take the cheaper wide receivers on that team. Chris Godwin, $84. He is probably my favorite Tampa Bay Buccaneer wide receiver. I know he's not as cheap as Antonio Brown, but I feel like he's the safest option there. I feel like he's going to get the most targets. And even if he doesn't, it should be like pretty much the same as Antonio Brown and Mike Evans targets for the most part. So Chris Godwin, I do think he's an interesting option. He's averaging close to 7 targets per game. And look, the matchup versus the Rams, it's not good. They're only allowing, the second fewest points per game to wide receivers, and their 9th DVA versus the pass, and only 126 receiving yards per game. But as of right now, I would say he's my favorite pairing option with Tom Brady, but I do know he is pretty expensive. So if you're going to go with Antonio Brown and save about $1,000, I totally get that as well. Antonio Brown seems to have some pretty good chemistry with Tom Brady. And Brady did actually miss Brown on a 50-some yard touchdown last week. So his stat line could have been better than what it was. But if I had to rank these wide receivers for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, personally, I'm at Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, and Mike Evans, just point per dollar wise on this slate. But I think all are fine plays. Brown's the most affordable, and he's got the... I feel like people are going to play Antonio Brown just because it's Antonio Brown and it's a primetime game, and I totally get that. He's gotten 6.5 targets per game this season and a 17.5% target share. Also a 25% market share of the team's air yards when he's on the field, so that does lead the whole team. So there's definitely some upside there, and I definitely like Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown quite a bit. Mike Evans being the third guy, but he's obviously got some upside as well. And Robert Woods, I kind of already talked about that. So we'll get into the cheaper wide receivers. Josh Reynolds, he's obviously the third option on the Los Angeles Rams, but that's not the worst thing in the world because he's definitely had a role in this offense. In the past 3 games for him, he's had 8, 9, and 10 targets, and he's been productive as well. So at only $6,800, I say only, but when you compare it to guys like Brown, Woods, Godwin, Evans, and Kupp, it's not that expensive. And if you can't afford all those guys, I do think Josh Reynolds is a fine mid-range play, but he definitely doesn't stand out as a super great value as well. He's definitely more expensive than he was in his past few games. So I think he's interesting. It's just he does feel a bit overpriced. If I could find an extra $1,000 for Antonio Brown, I'd obviously much rather do that. But I do think he is fine. Then after that, I mean, I don't really want to play any of these guys, maybe besides a dart throw on Van Jefferson. But Scotty Miller, I mean, these guys are kind of just afterthoughts in the offense now, especially with the addition of Antonio Brown. So Miller, $1,400, maybe he gets a target or two, but outside of that, nothing really you can really count on. Same with Tyler Johnson, all those kind of guys. So I think we move on to the tight end position now. All right, leading us off at the tight end position, we have Rob Gronkowski at $6,200. Now, to start the season, he was not that great for fantasy, but 4 of the past 5 weeks, he's actually been serviceable, and he's scored in 4 of those past 5 games as well. He played on 81% of the snaps last week, so he's on the field running routes, which is definitely what we like to see. And I wouldn't say he's fully washed. It's more so half-washed. He's definitely not the old Gronkowski, but he's still got Tom Brady throwing him the football, and he's where he's going to look to him in the red zone, so I do think he's an interesting option. But if he does not score a touchdown, you're probably not going to be happy with the numbers that he gives you. He's averaging less than 40 receiving yards per game, less than 3 catches per game, and less than 5 targets per game as well. He also only has a 13% target share, so I'm not expecting big things from Gronkowski, but he certainly has touchdown upside, and he's kind of going to be touchdown dependent here. But it is a good matchup versus the Rams as a tight end. They're tough versus quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. But their one soft spot in terms of fantasy points given up per game, it's actually the tight end position, allowing 13.4 fantasy points and close to 50 receiving yards per game. So not amazing numbers, and Gronk's not super amazing these days, but there is some touchdown upside here, and he does have a pretty large tight end versus linebacker matchup here, according to PFF. So Gronk, he's a fine touchdown play, but if he does not get you that touchdown, more than likely you're not going to be too happy if you rostered him at $6,200. Then going down to the Rams, we have Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett. Both these guys are going to be on the field quite a bit. Everett played on 61% of the snaps last week, and Tyler Higbee 84% of the snaps. So both these guys are viable. And the thing is, they pretty much have similar numbers on the season. Higbee has more touchdowns, but they have similar targets, similar target share. So in my opinion, I would just say play Gerald Everett over Tyler Higbee and save some money so you can spend up elsewhere. Maybe going with Everett gets you an Antonio Brown over a guy like Josh Reynolds, which I would feel much better about. So Everett, $2,600, he's seeing a little bit over 3 targets per game and close to a 10% target share. And Higbee, he has an 11% target share and about 3.75 targets per game. So you get really close, similar numbers here, and I feel like they're the same play. It's just Higbee's on the field a little bit more, so I guess he's somewhat safer, but that comes at the price point as well. So I would just side with Everett. And for how the Buccaneers are versus tight ends, it's kind of similar to the Rams, where they're good versus quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers, but they're more so mid-pack versus tight ends, allowing 13 points per game and overall similar numbers to the Los Angeles Rams. So I think both these guys are fine, but in my opinion, I like Gerald Everett over Higbee just because we get him at pretty much half the price point. Cameron Brate, he is a touchdown or bust play similar to Gronkowski, but he's a lot cheaper. But he's definitely on the field significantly less. So Gronk was on 81% of the snaps, and Brate's only at 36% of the snaps. But he is a red zone threat, and if he gets a touchdown at only $2,200, you'll be pretty happy about it. But outside of Cameron Brate, I don't think we can go any lower than that. So I guess we can just talk about the defenses. And both these defenses are pretty good, but these aren't defenses. These are not offenses that I like to target defenses again for the most part. But if you absolutely had to pick one, I would side with the Buccaneers just because overall their defense is super solid. Not saying the Rams aren't either, but they are playing at home, and they have the lower implied team total against them at only 21 points compared to 26. And Jared Goff is not the best quarterback in the world. Not saying Tom Brady is either, but Jared Goff is definitely prone to make some stupid decisions at some point. So at $3,800, I think he is viable, and they're the home team and they're home favorites, so that always sets up well for the defense. And overall, very stingy defense. The Rams, $3,000. They have a team total of close to, well, not close to 26, but it is 26.25, and they're actually flying across the country from West Coast to the East Coast, which I never love. And it's going to be pretty hard stopping all the Tampa Bay Buccaneers' weapons, and Antonio Brown, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Gronkowski, Leonard Fournette, Ronald Jones. So probably a pass for me on the Rams defense. Personally, I don't really like either of these defenses on this slate, but if I had to pick one, it's going to be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just because they're the home team and they have a bit of a softer matchup there versus Jared Goff. And as for the kickers, we have Ryan Suckup and Matt Gay. I can't really project kickers. They are fine value plays. If they hit their field goals, they hit their field goals and they become solid plays. And I could actually see the kickers working out here because both these offenses can certainly move the ball, but they're going to get some pretty tough defenses. So maybe they move the ball to a point where they can move the ball a little bit into the opponent's territory, but they just don't get into the end zone. So it could end up being a lot of field goals, hypothetically. So I could see a scenario if that happens where it could end up working out using kickers, but you really can't project these guys. But they're fine value plays if they hit their field goals and they hit their extra points, but it's good luck projecting that. And with that being said, guys, that's going to be it for this video. So I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure to leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. If you want to follow me over on social media, I'm at Pennell16 on Twitter, cpenn16 over on IG. And if you want to support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that. You can get access into my entire NFL DFS data sheet. I do these for showdown slates and main slates, and you can hop into the Discord chat as well. So I'm going to get out of here. Looking forward to the Thanksgiving slate, football, and food. You can't really get much better than that. So I'll be doing a video for the Thanksgiving slate. So I'll try to do the what I do for main slates for the Thanksgiving slate. Then I'll do all the other stuff for the main slate as well. So I guess we'll have double the content this week. So I guess I'll be busy, but I'll be looking forward to it because I love football. So I am perfectly fine with that. But I'm going to head out of here, guys. Hope you guys enjoy the start to your week, and I'll see you guys